Everyone, can you hear me back there, Mike?
Yeah,
It's okay. You can hear me okay back there? All right.
there's other spots where it balances your.
So before we get started with tonight's speaker, I wanted to mention that next month is our yearly co-meeting with EMBS. We used to call it the Warren Miller night. Now we just call it the Science Talk night. But be looking for the invites for that. That should be coming out next couple weeks. I think that's pretty much ready and planned. So tonight we have Gwen Stevens from People's Energy Cooperative. Gwen is the Director of Cooperative Relations at People's Energy. She's been at the cooperative for 13 years. Her department includes member and community relations, HR, safety, economic development, and legislative relations. She's been married to her husband, Ken, for 29 years. They have 3 daughters. They live in Rochester. Please welcome Gwen Stevens.
Well, thanks for coming out on this cold and dreary night and dark. I'm not used to the darkness quite yet, but I'm excited to be here because I love to tell the cooperative story. And when he said, could you tell the history? I'm like, oh yes, because I love the rural electrification story too. So if you're how many of you are members of the cooperative? I know 2 of you for sure, about 3 of you. So if you're not familiar with us, we're an electric distribution utility. So we're a little similar to RPU, and we're based out in Orinoco. But since we're a distribution utility, it means we just sell and distribute electricity. We don't generate it. The exception is we do have about 3 solar arrays that we own or partner with, but I'll talk more about those a little bit later. So I'm going to give you a little context about us before I jump into the history and all that fun stuff, but I'm going to talk about the history of rural electrification, history of Peoples, and then Chris also asked me to talk about what are some of our legislative issues that are facing us in our industry. So just to give you some context, we serve about 20,000 voting members. And so one membership could entail 2 to 3 people, I suppose, at a household, on average. So we probably serve, 40, 45, 50,000 people maybe, in about 25,000 homes and businesses that are interconnected to our system through 3,000 miles of line. This green area shows our service territory, which is about 1,000 square miles, and that white portion in the middle is Rochester, just to give you some orientation, if it's hard to see from the back there. But our service territory it's primarily in Olmsted County, as you can see, but then we also touch Dodge, Fillmore, Wabasha, and Winona counties. So for those of you who aren't aware, but there's 3 different types of electric utilities in terms of the business model. So Peoples is, like I said, is an electric cooperative, which means we're a not-for-profit entity. Our sole mission and purpose is to serve the members who own the cooperative. And so they also govern the cooperative. And any margins that we have at the end of the year are allocated to our members and then eventually returned to them through capital credits through a process that it's usually a few years later, but they get returned to our members. The second type is a municipality, which is what RPU is. Those are typically owned by the city that they serve. We're similar in that, we serve essentially who owns us, or they're similar to us in that they serve basically the city and the citizens within the city that essentially own them. But the one difference is in the governance, in that RPU does have a board like we do. However, our board is elected by the membership, and RPU's board is nominated by the mayor and then appointed by the city council. So the city council has to approve their appointment to the board. The other difference is too that the board can make an action or make a decision, but then there are things that the city council also has to approve. When our board makes a decision, that's the decision. And then the third type excuse me, is an investor-owned utility, and I think you're all familiar with Xcel Energy, or Alliant Energy that used to serve parts of southern Minnesota, but they're investor-owned, which means that they're a for-profit entity. Excuse me. And they're obviously bigger than the two of us. They're generating electricity, transmitting it, and distributing it. Plus, they also have their gas line of business as well. And they're in multiple states. So there's the three different types of business models. And then there's also, like I said, we're a distribution utility. So then there's the GNT, or the generation and transmission company, which is what Xcel is. So they generate the power and transmit it. Sometimes there's just transmission companies, and then there's the distribution companies. So however the power is distributed out. As I stated, we're governed by a board of directors, and they are elected by our members, and their primary role is to set guidelines and policies. They hire the CEO. They set the rates, and then they also approve our annual budgets and work plans. And so this is a picture of our current board. As far as I know, none of them are engineers that I can recall. Some might recognize John Winter. John used to work, he's retired from SIMPA. And then we were fortunate to get him on our board. And then we have 66 employees. A lot of times people think of line workers when they think of utility employees. We do have 23 line workers. That is our largest group. But we also have, like in our engineering department, we have our system engineer, and I actually asked Chai to come with me tonight. So we have a system engineer, we have stakers that go out and stake the lines. We also have mappers. And then we also have other folks like meter techs. We have a master electrician. And then we have the other side of the business that any businesses would have. We have HR, we have IT, marketing and communications, and that sort of thing. And then finance and accounting, as well as warehouse personnel. Hopefully I didn't forget anybody, but. So before I dive into the history, one of the things we do at the co-op is every single meeting we have a safety share or a safety spotlight. And so I'm going to indulge myself tonight and take advantage of having an audience, just to remind everybody to be alert, slow down, and move over when you're in a work zone. Not only is it safe and best practice, but it's also the law. Last week, I had the opportunity to be out with one of our two of our construction crews. And I was talking to the general foreman after this truck kind of went whizzing by us on a country road. And he said, when I started, my biggest fear was an electrical contact incident. He goes, today it's traffic. So if you wouldn't mind, the holidays are coming up and you have things to talk about, you want to avoid politics and religion around the dinner table, you can talk about safety. And just if you could help spread the word to tell people to move over when they see utility or anybody with flashing lights alongside the road. All right, so to set the stage for the historical discussion, I'm going to start with a short video that our national association put together back when it was the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association's 75th anniversary. So I'm going to start with this because I think it gives some good visuals and sets the stage. All right. So the rural electrification really started with Franklin D. Roosevelt when he signed an executive order in May of 1935 that started or that created the Rural Electrification Administration. So this administration was tasked with formulating, administering, and supervising programs that would help bring electricity to rural America. Today, it's referred to as the Rural Utilities Services, and it includes rural telephone, water, and wastewater services. And Roosevelt was driven by the fact that in 1934, 10% of the farms had electricity in the US, where 90% of farms in France and Germany had electricity. So these are pictures that I took when I visited the memorial to him in Washington, D.C. And you can see on the bottom two pictures there are tiles that are part of that memorial. It's a really neat memorial. If you ever have the chance, I encourage you to go there. But those bottom two tiles show, you know, give him recognition for his role in helping electrify rural America. So then the next critical step then was the signing of the Rural Electrification Act in 1936. And this is what then funded that administration to be able to help set up the co-ops. And what I love about this is the part of the story, one of the parts of the story that I love is because it was a bipartisan effort. It's like something you don't hear about as much anymore these days, it seems like. But the gentleman on the left is Johnny Rankin. He was a Republican senator, and then George William Norris is on the right when this was signed into law. So it was just great that we had a Republican and a Democrat come together to help make it happen. So this act authorized $40 million annually. And I want you to remember that number, 40 million. To be distributed among states to provide federal loans through the administration for the installation of the distribution systems. And I really want to emphasize that it's loans because sometimes I think people think co-ops get grant money and we get free money, and we don't all the time, even though we try really hard, don't we? Sometimes try. But while we get really great loan rates from our US, we are paying on loans. We don't get the money from the government. So then the next step was to establish the rural electric associations or cooperatives to build and manage the systems at the local level. So this is, again, one of the great parts of the story because it was people coming together to provide a service for themselves, but using teamwork to make it happen. But it was a challenging time too, because they had to go door to door to homes and businesses to get people to sign up. One of the challenges was, remember, this is during the Depression era. So, people were already strapped for money. And there had to be at least 2 members per mile of line in order for the co-ops to get the loans from the REA. Okay, so like I said, signing up members was a challenge across the country. Many farmers were concerned about paying back the loans, and they asked questions like, would directors be personally responsible for repayment? Would their farms be part of the loan security? Could the government foreclose on their personal property if the cooperatives didn't pan out? So it was a really scary time for them. And again, money was tight. Others were concerned because the country was still in the midst of the Depression. And many people were skeptical of the project because if the power companies that already existed, so a lot of time, there was already electricity in a lot of the major cities at this time, and Rochester at this time had power in the city of Rochester. But they're like, well, if it's too expensive for them to come out to the rural, they're already set up, they're established. How are we going to do this as farmers? How are we going to make it work? But thankfully they figured it out and they persevered. And this statue is if you've ever been to the theater at Epcot's American Adventure, this is a statue of a farmer, and you can see it says Spirit of Self-Reliance. And when I visited there with my family, I couldn't help but just be drawn to this and think of the rural electrification story, because it really was the farmers who came together to make it happen. So and they were self-reliant to bring electricity to their homes. All right, so that's the story in a really quick nutshell of the Rural Electrification Act and how Peoples got its start. So these two gentlemen that are on the screen here are two of the founding board members at Peoples, and back then it was called Peoples Power Cooperative of Olmsted County. They only served members in Olmsted County at first. Mr. Blumentritt on the left and a man named Jerry Carroll, who's not pictured here, were paid $1 for each member they could get signed up. And which barely covered the cost, because a lot of times they would have to drive back. They might go, share the story with them and tell them the benefits, but then the people would want to think about it. So then they'd have to drive back to the farm and talk, and sometimes up to 4 times. It took a long time for them to get some people to be willing to pay for the $2 membership fee. We no longer have a membership fee. It's just all of that's just part of our service fees. But Mr. Blumentritt owned a country store, and he was really a key leader in forming the cooperative. And he eventually served as the first president. But there's a book we have at the co-op with some of our history in it. And there's a story in there that talks about how he was really getting frustrated with this one particular area of the cooperative because he just couldn't get people to sign up. And so Mr. Caulfield, the gentleman on the right there, he said, "You're not handling this situation right. What you need to do is persuade the minister of their church that it's a good thing. If he's convinced, he'll tell his parishioners and they'll be more receptive." So as the story goes, then Mr. Caulfield and the county agent, which there was a county agent assigned by the REA for each of the co-ops that was helping the co-op form, they went to visit the pastor of the church in this rural area. And, they were just talking about farming and how the crops were doing and the price of crops and the weather and whatnot. And then kind of interjected, just not a hard sale, but just interjected conversation about rural electrification and how it really could benefit farmers. So the pastor listened attentively as they talked about it. And then years later, Caulfield said he didn't have much to say, but our visit must have done a lot of good because in a short time we were signing up members left and right in their particular community. So I thought that was kind of a little fun fact about the history. Another group that had significant influence on increasing membership in cooperatives were rural women. There are reports of many of them that they were willing to pay the membership fee so that they could enjoy the conveniences that a lot of their friends who lived in town who had electricity, the conveniences of doing a lot of their household tasks. And so most of the homes, for most homes that went electric, first it was a light bulb, and then a lot of them then would have a radio. But for the women, one of the first household chores made easier and safer was ironing. Believe it or not, women no longer had to deal with the unsafe gas-powered irons, nor did they have to heat up an iron on a stove like in the middle of a hot summer day. They could just plug in an electric iron to do the job, which was also a lot safer. Eventually came the washing machines that replaced washboards and hand crank wringers, and then electric stoves made making meals more efficient and less laborious for women. So they played a significant role in convincing their husbands to sign up for the cooperative. All right, so gaining members was the first hurdle for the co-ops, and then the second one was applying for the first REA loan, which was granted to Peoples on December 5th of 1936, and then the contractor began building the first lines. I've heard stories, I haven't seen a document, but I have heard stories of how a lot of the farmers would drill the holes or help dig the holes for the poles, and then the contractors would come through to string the line so that the farmers kind of helped move the progress along. So let's see. So then the big problem facing a lot of the electric cooperatives at that time too was then, yep, it's supposed to be blank, thanks though. Part of the problem was that they couldn't get that electric power from the, like, so for example, we were fortunate at Peoples, but we got the power from RPU. It wasn't RPU at the time. It was just the city of Rochester had a power station. But in some cases, the power companies were charging huge amounts and it wouldn't fly with the REA. And so there was a big challenge, but we were fortunate that the city of Rochester was willing to sell power to the co-op. So we had a power supplier. So then the first lines were energized for the first time in September of 1938 to the home of John T. Brake of Marion Township. So he was our first member to get electricity. Ironically, this property would later become home to our third building, the building on Highway 14. This was out in Marion Township. Now it's owned by Rochester Public Schools if you ever drive by there. But that first year, approximately 300 farms on about 160 miles of line were energized. The average kilowatt hour consumption for a home per month was 48 kilowatt hours. Today, just to put into context, the average is about 900 kilowatt hours per month at a home. So this was our first substation, and this received power from the hydro dam on Lake Zumbro. Another blank slide. But from what I can tell, there's some gaps in the history as I've tried to research this over time, but the cooperative continued to grow up until World War II began. And during the war, construction was put on hold. Like a lot of things, resources were needed to support the war effort. And so the government had put a halt on rural electric expansion. Some short extensions were allowed in like to help in like 1941, 1942. There were some expansions, like if there was a farm that was just, it was just one short, span to get to them that helped them be more productive. They would do it. They would allow that to happen because they needed farmers to be more productive because again, a lot of those men were off fighting the war. So they needed to help substitute that labor by using electric machinery at that time. So let's see here. So during the war years, Olmsted County farmers made effective use of their electric appliances and devices to put more food in the hands of those who needed it. And then let's see. Oh, I already said that. Sorry. So it was the War Production Board that was responsible for the scale of priorities. They relaxed those restrictions in 43. It was somewhat so that farmers close could get those lines. But then the War Board were like, wait a second, these farmers are more productive, and so we need to help them out. If you've ever been to the World War II memorial out in Washington, D.C., you've seen the wreaths on the columns that are part of that. And I'm just going to read something from the National Park Service. Let's see here. Each column has a hollow center reflecting the individual loss of each state or territory in the war. There are 2 wreaths for each pillar, one on the front and one on the back. Each pillar has both, but they alternate from side to side for variety. The wheat wreath represents agriculture and the oak wreath represents industry. This symbolizes the fact that not only did the states and territories give their citizens to serve in the military, they also offered their resources and the fruits of their labor for the cause of victory. Without the hard work, sacrifice, and support of the home front, success on the battlefront was impossible. A heavy rope binds each of the states and territories together so as to represent our nation coming together in this great struggle. So once again, the farmers really stepped up as they were asked to increase production, and many still did not have even the convenience of electricity during that time. So anyway, as the end of World War II approached, then the cooperative began to prepare for the return to mass construction of rural lines. Farmers who had debated on whether or not they were going to sign up, the cost was no longer really a factor. A lot of rural Americans at that time had savings it was historic savings that they hadn't had in the past. So there was more members coming on. Then in 1944, the cooperative purchased 60 miles of primary, secondary, and service lines connected to a total of 298 consumers from the Olmsted County Power Company, and then that company dissolved. So the co-op just took that over. And then as late as 1947, there were still many farm families in Olmsted and the surrounding communities that still didn't have electric service. And unfortunately, as construction ramped up after the war, it almost is mirroring the COVID ramp up of things, but they just couldn't get the materials. They couldn't get conduit. They couldn't get the transformers, the poles, and the different pieces of equipment. Fortunately, there was the REA then helped break that bottleneck, and then there was an aluminum producer that entered the conductor manufacturing business, and that helped open things up too. But so by the end of 1948, the worst was over and construction began to move full speed ahead again for the cooperative. So I don't have one of our first board pictures, but this is one of our early boards. We think this one dates back to 1946. You can see Mr. Caulfield and Mr. Blumentritt there in the front row in this picture. Just some other fun facts. Our first building was on 3rd Street Southeast, where there's no building there anymore. The building that was there's no longer there. Obviously, it's been reconstructed. The building on the left in this picture is where like Dunlap and Seeger are, and what's the restaurant? Terza. And then the right-hand side, I know it's not the Holiday Inn, it's kind of an old picture, but that's where we were first located. Ironically, so Dunlap and Seeger has been our attorney for probably 45 years. And I'm not sure where the first attorney was from, because I don't think Dunlap and Seeger has been around that long. But anyway, ironically, I just think it's ironic that our attorney's office is where we used to be. But if any of you know Dan Burnt, he was our corporate attorney since 1983. So we're only on our 3rd attorney, which is kind of corporate attorney, because the gentleman before him was the first attorney and was the attorney until 1983. But when the cooperative began, there was only 3 employees. By 1949, when this picture was taken, there were about 37 employees, and they were busting at the seams at that Broadway location. So then they built this building, which was on North Broadway. The building still stands. It's across the street from the rec center. It's been remodeled a few times since then, but that was our second building. Another little fun fact from our history, in March of 1949, the Lincoln Schroeder farm was featured in the Highline Highlights, which is still our newsletter to this day. But he was featured because his was the first farm in Minnesota to be an all-electric farm. So the house and the milking parlor and all that stuff was all electric. I don't think these are the first bucket trucks, but we can't verify that. but the co-op didn't get its first bucket truck until sometime in the 1950s. And it's crazy for me to think about that today, again, after having spent time out with the crew this last week, that to do the work they do without a bucket truck, it's already a pretty physical job, even with the tools they have. But to think about them climbing up the poles, and then you get up there and you realize you forgot something, and then you climb back. Oh, I just cringe to think about that. Anyway, then in 1952, the cooperative started buying power from Interstate Power Company to supplement the power it was purchasing from RPU, because as RPU grew and our service territory grew, the demand was growing, and I keep saying RPU, but the city of Rochester couldn't supply all of the power. And then in 1955, the city of Rochester told the cooperative it would have to discontinue serving the cooperative, because the city was just growing so much that it needed the power for them. They just didn't have enough for both systems, I'm assuming, without building and investing heavily in that. So then in 1955, we joined Darrell Power Cooperative and started getting power from them in 56. And so this is a picture taken, again, there's Mr. Blumentritt. 4 miles east of Rochester. This is a switching operation. Obviously, it's a staged photograph, but the cooperative continued to see growth in membership, especially when IBM was built in 1957. And I know some of you are IBMers out there, so. That location on Highway 14, we moved there in 71 and remained there until 2012 when we moved to our current location in Orinoco. And that too was, we started to kind of outgrow it, but also it needed a lot of uh, maintenance and remodeling and stuff just to get things, like the carpet was bubbling up. And there was some of it was superficial things, but then also like our IT room needed a better space. And it turned out to be, it was much cheaper for us to build than it was to fix that building. And it's a good thing we did because we came out light years ahead in the end because we've grown since then. So we could have never stayed in that building without expanding on that. So not a lot of big events in the 70s and 80s. Specific to the cooperative, they continue to grow, hold their annual meetings, elect board members, and continue to serve their members. However, a 1978 mandate by the government prevented the use of natural gas and forced the generation, the G&Ts, the generation utilities, into using coal and nuclear power. They could no longer use natural gas. So this is one of the reasons our country relies so heavily on coal today, is because of those mandates back in the late 70s. So the the generation companies were basically forced to use coal, and the cost to build a utility-sized power plant, I probably don't need to explain this to this group, but I mean, it's millions and today maybe even billions of dollars to do that. So there's long-term contracts that have to be signed, like our power agreement with Darylyn today. I mean, I will be long gone and dead before that contract is up because they have to be long in order for them to get financing, to build them and that sort of thing. So those all requirements contracts are really important, but and so you can't just shut down a coal plant. You strand a lot of assets by doing that. And those plants continue to be the backbone of U.S. power generation, even with all of the great advancements with renewables and stuff. Really, those coal plants are still really the backbone. This brings us up to 1991. Some of you may remember the Halloween blizzard of 91. I would have been a junior in high school and I do not remember this. So we must not have lost power. That's the only thing I can think of. But this really hit the co-op hard. 4,500 members were without power. 3,000 of them were restored within 48 hours, but the rest of them almost had to wait up to a week in order to get power back on. It broke 343 poles and 505 wires, and there were 543 like different areas that were affected by trees. And there were in excess of 1,100 leaning poles. So it required the help of 45 additional line workers to come in from other utilities and contractors to help us restore power. And I've been through two or three major outages where they've been 2 or 3 days long and we've had to call in contractors or extra people, but maybe it's 10 or 12. So this just kind of tells you the magnitude of this storm and how badly it impacted our service territory. All right, so I've talked about how our region has grown, and as the city of Rochester grew, so did RPU, service territory, which means ours shrunk. The biggest annexation to date took place in December 2010 and 2011, and the cooperative lost 1,300 members due to those annexations. And this is perfectly legal. This is how it works. A city can take the annex in that land. And Rochester has an ordinance that there can only be one power provider in the city. So that's why then RPU took over those members. But not only did they take the existing members, but then it was any potential new businesses that came on or new members that came on too. So this caused an 8% decrease in our membership. And just to give you some context, so since 1974, the city has annexed about 30 to 35 square miles of our service territory. And I think Rochester's about 72 square miles, I want to say. So it's had a big impact on us. And just to give you some context, so this was back in 2012. This is data from 2012. But so we had about 14,000 consumers and RPU had about 50,000. The consumers per mile of line for us was 5.7 and RPUs was 64.7. The revenue per mile of line was 12,000 for us and 184,000 for RPU. But then when you look at the investment in plant customer, it's higher for us at 7,000 and RPU was $6,000 per customer. And this is totally normal for co-ops to have a low. I think the national average today is like 7.2 members per mile of line, where a municipality would be in that 65, maybe even 80 members. So what happens is then you can spread those fixed costs over more people. So we're often compared to RPU because of our rates, our service charge is higher than RPU, but that's why, is because there's just fewer people to spread those fixed costs over. So this was probably the Southern Minnesota Energy Cooperative was formed, and this was probably one of the most major events in co-op history. In 2013, February of 2013, we joined together with 11 other co-ops across Southern Minnesota. So they're all named there, but we partnered together to form the Southern Minnesota Energy Cooperative because Alliant Energy wanted to get out of Minnesota and they weren't willing to negotiate with 12 different entities. They wanted one entity to negotiate with to sell that service territory. So I think this was the largest undertaking in the nation for a co-op to do something like this, to take over an investor owned like this, or the investor owned service territory. But it was a long haul. So it started in 2013, and I won't get into all the gory details, but there's a lot of meshing of folks and transferring of services. And then we're still working with the infrastructure piece of it to this day. But it finally, in July of 2015, we got all of the approvals from the Minnesota PUC, Public Utilities Commission, Iowa's Public Utility, and even the federal commission that had, the FERC, that had to approve this sale. And this was significant for us because it helped us grow our membership by 50%. And so even if Rochester continues to grow, the advantage of this purchase by the co-op is that we now gained the city of Stewartville, Dover, Eyota, Elgin, Chatfield, and Plainview. So as Rochester grows, those communities also grow. So it's not as big of a deal if the city annexes anything from the co-op. This was a huge benefit to our members. Yeah, so hopefully that will help us outpace any future annexation. So while we were in the midst of working on that whole Alliant acquisition, we partnered with our two neighboring co-ops, Freeborn Mauer, and at the time it was called Tri-County Electric. Today it's My Energy, but we partnered with those two cooperatives to form the Minnesota 3 LLC. And this was to build this solar array that's behind this group of people. This is just north of the co-op, just off of 52 if you drive by there. But we built this and we're selling the power from this to our power provider. Usually you only buy power, you don't sell it to them. So this was kind of a big deal at that time too. And then another major solar project was our People's Community Solar. This is an 820 panel solar array that's in the Elgin Business Park on the east side of Highway 42 if you go from the south into Elgin. And this allows our members who either can't have a solar array on their property or they don't want one, they don't want to manage it, they don't want to deal with it. It allows them to subscribe to the output. So they don't actually own the panels or anything, but they subscribe to the output, and then it's a credit on their bill so that they can take advantage of renewable energy if they want to. And we've had a couple other renewable partnerships since then with the county. We don't own them, but we have power purchase agreements and that sort of thing. So anyway, so that brings us to today. And today we are known as People's Energy Cooperative. We continue to be a distribution cooperative. Unlike a lot of cooperatives, we chose not to get into broadband, so we don't do anything with broadband. And today we also power communities with more than electricity. We have a lot of great programs. We have our Operation Roundup program where members can elect to round up their bill to the nearest dollar. That money goes into a fund, and then there's a separate board then that grants that money to local nonprofits, schools, fire departments, and EMS departments, city parks, and that sort of thing. They grant money out on a quarterly basis. We also have our scholarship program, and that's funded by those capital credits. Sometimes those go unclaimed if somebody moves away, doesn't give us a forwarding address, or sometimes a member dies. Those are unclaimed property. So they'll go to the state for unclaimed property for like 7 years. If nobody claims it, comes back to the co-op, and we have to give it. We have to donate. It has to go to a charitable source. So a lot of co-ops elect to use that for scholarship money. And then in recent years, we've given 30,000. I think last year it was 35. No, last year might have been $50,000 in scholarship money to local kids. And all their parents just have to have one guardian. That's a member of the co-op, and they qualify for that. So, and then we also have economic development programs. And some of that is there's money through USDA to help rural communities attract and retain local businesses. Our mission at the co-op is to bring value to our member owners and communities by providing reliable electricity, superior customer service, and innovative energy solutions at fair and reasonable prices. Just to give you some context, I think our total utility plant is around 192 million today, valued at, remember the 40 million I told you about earlier? That was to fund the whole country for a year. And then we have total assets around 180 million. So we've grown a little bit. Our vision is to be a trusted energy resource to our members, an employer of choice, and then a respected business partner within our communities. And so we do a lot of things in the spirit of the cooperative principles, which I'll talk a little bit too. So I mentioned that Dairyland Power Cooperative, we started buying power for them in 1955. They are still our primary power provider. We do buy some power from Interstate Power and Light through SMEC, but that was part of the agreement when we purchased that service territory. But that ends July 31st this year. I can't believe it's been 10 years already. But then all power will then be purchased from Dairyland Power. And Dairyland serves primarily in Wisconsin, as you can see on the map. But there's 3 co-ops in Minnesota, 3 in Iowa, and 1 in Illinois that they serve. And they power about 600,000 people and have 500 employees. I don't want to assume that everybody knows how the grid works, and this is probably really oversimplifying it, but it was a great graphic that Dairyland had, so I stole it. But basically, so the power is generated at a power plant, it goes to a switchyard, then that feeds it through transmission lines, and then it comes to a substation. We're unlike a lot of co-ops in the state that we own our own substations. A lot of times the power company does, or the generation company does. So comes to the substation, and then we distribute it out to our members. And so that's how there's the generation, transmission, and distribution aspect of the system. I don't know how many of you know we're part of the MISO network. There's regional transmission organizations. There's 10 of them across the country. So here's how they're broken down. ERCOT got a lot of attention a few years ago when the storm hit down there. So they became a little bit known there. But we're part of MISO, so is RPU, so is Excel. And this extends all the way up into Manitoba and goes all the way down to Louisiana. It too is a not-for-profit entity. And I'm going to oversimplify this, but they basically trade electricity, sell electricity, and help it flow where it needs to flow when it needs to be there. So, which I know very much oversimplifies it, but would be for all night. So we're guided as a cooperative. It doesn't matter if you're sorry, I wasn't sure what was going on. Doesn't matter if you're an electric cooperative, if you're a food co-op, if you're an ag co-op, all cooperatives are guided by these 7 principles. And the principle of open and voluntary membership is that you have the choice to become a member. That's not quite true for electric cooperatives in the state of Minnesota because we have defined service territories. So if you want to get electricity and you're within our boundaries, you either have to generate it yourself or you have to get it from us. There's a few exceptions to that, but you have to need a lot of energy to do that. We're democratically member controlled, meaning that the members democratically elect the governing body, that board. Their economic participation is basically just paying their bill. We are autonomous and independent. We're not a government agency, although we are heavily regulated. We are independent. We're independent of others. Education, training, and information is a principle that we abide by to train our employees, our board. We have a very educated board. And then the reason I'm here tonight is that we want to make sure people understand how does it work? What does the co-op do? And make sure that just people are informed. And then you already seen examples of cooperation among cooperatives with the SMEC acquisition, with the Minnesota 3 solar array, how we partner. And those are grand scale partnerships. You could probably any day of the week in the co-op, somebody has reached out to another co-op because we don't compete. So it's great because we can share ideas and bounce ideas and do things together that are for the betterment of all of our members. And then concern for community. And I already talked about the programs that we offer and that sort of thing, but that also includes legislative activity, which I'll get to. As I stated, we're heavily regulated. Like any business, we have OSHA. Even though we're not for profit, we still have taxes. We pay property taxes. We do pay in sales tax. We pay employment tax and that sort of thing. We are governed we have a lot of regulations with the EPA, the National Electric Safety Code, USDA, the state of Minnesota, and then the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. So again, we don't have to go to Xcel. If they want to do a rate change, they have to go to the Public Utilities Commission. We don't. The board makes that determination when a rate change is needed and what it will be. So these are a lot of the outside forces we're impacted by. Like any business, the economy, it can affect our communities. Recently, since COVID, the inflation has been astronomical. We've had some of our materials have increased by 250%, which has had a significant impact on us. The infrastructure, whether that's building it, maintaining it, upgrading it. I already said the regulations, the environment, and there's 2 ways. So one, obviously the physicalness of most of our lines are above ground. They're overhead lines. And so they're exposed to the elements, right? So we have a lot of work that we do to help mitigate that through vegetation management. And then again, through the maintenance of our system, customer preferences and behaviors. We serve everyone. And so we have people over here and we have people over here. And we try to make everybody happy, but we do our best to do what's in the best interest of the most. Affordability. This has a lot to do with balancing the needs of the cooperative business and the reliability that our members have come to expect with our members' ability to pay. We could put all of the lines underground and maybe have 100% reliability, but the cost, it's just not necessary to go to that extreme. The competition, I talked a little bit about Rochester, even though we have defined service territories, our competition really is in 2 areas. So one, the annexation a little bit, but that's not that frequent. But employees and economic development. So trying to attract businesses, that's where we do tend to compete with our neighboring co-ops and then just other businesses. And then, as you know, technology is ever changing. All right, so that's the history, that's about us, and I'll quick touch on our legislative priorities. Does anybody have any questions before I go? Oh, there we go. Oh, into legislative, yeah.
When RPU annexes areas, do they compensate you?
Yes,
For the,
yep.
For the
Yeah, it's not
infrastructure?
like this big bad takeover, kind of a thing, but yes, we are compensated.
For the
That's a great
infrastructure
question.
That they take on?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Any other questions? I brought our engineer if you have any technical ones, because I won't be able to probably, his was up back here.
You'd mentioned that because of the nature of the sparsity of the customers, your rates are probably higher than the RPU rates. Could you tell us about how much?
Sure. Oh, I can look something. So our power energy cost is actually, the energy cost itself is a little bit lower than RPUs, but it's our basic service charge, and that's the charge that covers all of our fixed charges. And about, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago, we went through a rate philosophy change where we are trying to collect all of those fixed charges in that fixed fee versus adding some of that to the energy charge, because there are co-ops and other utilities that add some of those fees into the energy charge. So like our urban rate is like $30, I want to say, and I think RPUs is like 20 something. It's not as big of a gap as it used to be. But I can pull up a chart. I wasn't expecting a rate question.
That's what we pay for.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah. But it's not as big of a gap as it used to be. And you had a question.
I did. It's also a rate question.
Sure.
How different are the rates for a company like Excel versus, or just any investor-owned company compared to a like RPU or a co-op?
Yeah, so investor owns they do tend to be lower. I was gonna see if I could quick find that really quick on there. Because I know where I have a chart for that. If I could get to it quick.
Off the window.
Let's see if I can pull this up really quick.
So is it the one from the annual meeting?
Yeah, I
Looking
think
for
I
that
got
too.
it.
Where that is.
They did upgrade the
I
data.
got it, but it's a big file, so it may take a bit. I'll let that load and I'll come back to that, okay? Because it's a good question. Okay, any other questions before? Yeah,
Questions.
Yeah.
Maybe dumb questions.
no dumb
Do you
questions.
guys can share the transmission line with like the RPU?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I can answer that.
Not all of them, but yes, we do.
Because this one follow another questions. Like I saw your the map, like each of the company has the territory.
Yeah.
So you guys, right now focus on the rural. So I think maybe RPU say, well, that one is the high cost and then no customer. So after maybe 10 or 20 years, the customer population goes up.
Right.
Then the RPU can RPU penetrate to your territory.
Yeah, that's what they're doing right now. So, well, not necessarily that, I suppose, but as Rochester grows outward, that gives them the right. They'll annex the land first, and then once they annex the land, they'll go to the PUC.
Which means this is that will all free selected by the customer. No.
I'm not sure.
Can you say that again?
I mean, if the same area right now is occupied by your company people, and after years, the RPU intrude to that area because they have no rate, then the people want to switch to the RPU. Is that the free choice or?
They're not able to switch. It's whoever owns that service territory, they have to go with that power provider.
Oh.
So RPU can't
can't take over something unless the city of Rochester annexes that.
Right.
That territory becomes part of the city of Rochester.
Uh-huh, okay, thank
So
you,
it has to become, yeah, it has to become in city boundaries before they can.
okay.
So yeah. And actually, if you're close enough, I think there are some gray areas. If you're a large enough load, on a boundary, you can choose, but it's a very, very large load.
Yeah.
We don't have any on our territory that would.
And there have been some exceptions made with the city because they're like, we have nothing close to that. So for them to build the line out to it might be too expensive, or there's a few exceptions where somebody might be in the city of Rochester and still served by us, but it's not that many, but there are a few. But it's not by their choice, it's by the utilities choice.
Yeah, we serve a few members of Excel that they asked us to serve, even though it's in their territory, because they would have to build, 6 miles of line for
Right.
one member or something like that. So they'll let us serve that member.
I found the PowerPoint, but it's taking forever to load on here. So I'll keep trying to do that as we go here because I know it's deep into the PowerPoint. Okay, so moving on to legislative issues. So we have a saying in co-op world that co-ops were born in politics and we could die in politics. And so we stay pretty close to our local legislators and communicate with them pretty regularly while they're in session and then also while they're out of session. And so this fall, every fall that there's an election, we host what we call energy forums or legislative energy forums. And so these slides are from that, and I'll quick go through those. And obviously back, was it 2022 when the carbon free by 2040 was passed? That was a big deal for us. We're still trying to wade through or trying to understand what is that going to mean in the end. And I think the PUC is still trying to figure out what are the guidelines for that. So that one's kind of off the table, on the table, but we don't know what we're up against totally yet there. But so this year though, for 2025, as we go into the 2025 session, we have 3 key issues that we're taking to our legislators. And one of them is old, and we've been doing it for, this will be the 4th year, but I'll get to that. So the first one is net metering, and we have a video for that to explain that one. All right. Oops. There we go. Okay, so just a few key points from that net metering policy is outdated. It has served its purpose, and we're not asking for the legislature to eliminate it. We're just asking for it to be equitable to our other members. Because that net meter power is expensive power that then all of our members have to pay for. So that's one of them. The second one is, if you don't know, there's a nuclear moratorium in the state of Minnesota. And if the state wants to become carbon free by 2030, we feel that nuclear is an option that can help get there. But we can't even explore it, and we would not put in nuclear reactors, right? We're just a distribution cooperative, but we can't even explore the new technology with nuclear power if there's a moratorium. So here's another video to explain this one. Oops. Okay, so just key points from that nuclear is the most reliable power source. It has been proven safe. Many of you, you guys probably all know, like most of our naval fleet, right? A lot of our ships are powered and have been for years by small nuclear reactors, and that's some technology that should be looked at further. Because there have been significant advancements that have been made, and we believe it's a crucial key to carbon reduction. So our ask for them was just that they repeal the nuclear moratorium so that it can be evaluated and to not drag their heels, because one, to get it repealed, then to start doing the study. I mean, could take 10 up to 10 years before a nuclear plant could be built. So, or be online. So anyway, the last one is a property tax one, and I'm over my time. So property tax, this is the one we've been dealing with for 4 years, hoping to get this issue fixed in the legislature. Basically what it is in 1939, we were granted an in lieu of tax payment of $10 per 100 members for property out in the rural areas. About 4 or 5 years ago, the Department of Revenue started including meters, streetlights, and load control receivers in the valuation process. And just to be quick, it's cost us over $500,000 in overcharges from the Department of Revenue. So we have absolute bipartisan support on this bill. Twice it died in the tax omnibus bill because that didn't get passed. 2 years, and then 1 year the legislature wouldn't take action on it because there was litigation around it, because co-ops were essentially suing the Department of Revenue over those charges. And so we're just asking for clarification in the statute so that it's in statute, so it cannot be fixed. I'm not going to read all of that, but basically this was bureaucratic overreach in our opinion. And it's very costly to cooperatives across the state. So we're just hoping that the fourth time's the charm this year, and we're asking them to make it a separate bill and not stick it in an omnibus bill. So those are our key legislative things that are going right now at the state level. At the federal level, we're active with like the farm bill, because USDA, that RUS funding, and the funding that the grant money and programs for rural development are part of that farm bill. So we've been working with legislators on that. But that's it for that. I mean, I don't want to go too long, but I'm happy to answer questions.
On the last one, the property tax.
Yeah.
Is there any comparison to what other states are doing, especially neighboring states?
You know, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what they do. I think there are other states that do it in lieu of, or I guess some don't even have the tax, but I haven't looked into that to see what we're just stick with what we have because it was working just fine. But so the problem is that they like those load control receivers. So we're going to start getting taxed on those. Those are important to help with load reduction during times of peak demand. So we're like, this is the same. It's the same principle. It's the same intent, is to ensure reliable and safe service. Those then help with reducing that load. So it just doesn't make sense that they would start taxing on us. But so So that's all I have. Any other questions? I apologize for going so long.
Sorry.
You're welcome. Thank you. I thought I found the slide with the rates, but it's Alliance rate and I can't read it. Or once I could read it, it was Alliance. So I'll